Hi everyone, welcome. On behalf of the Melikian Center at ASU, the Russia Institute at the University of South Florida, and the Havighurst Center at the University of Miami. Thank you for coming to this, what is I think now the fourth in our Creative Horizons series, which came out of necessity, but we are hoping to continue well beyond when that necessity eventually ends, a digital collaboration to help people in our university communities and beyond to get to know artists in all different kinds of mediums and genres from all across the former Soviet Union. We're all very happy and privileged today to have with us Ermina Takenova. I hope that you had a chance to watch her artist statement video and see some of the work that she's, that's in progress, completed work, to learn about her progress and her inspirations. So Ermina, thank you very much for joining us today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And again, thank you to everybody else, all our guests from across across all the US and beyond. Thank you for joining us for this live Q&A session. So I will moderate today, and what all that means is that I'll just get us started, get the ball rolling by asking a few questions that I prepared in advance. And then we will turn it over for audience questions, which we'll have plenty of time for. I promise I only have just 2 or 3 questions to start off with. So we look forward to hearing from all of you. When you do want to ask a question, if you don't want to speak into the Zoom space, you're welcome to put questions in the chat and I can read them from there. And if you do want to speak into the Zoom space, if you use the raise hand option, then I will be happy to call on you and you can unmute yourself and ask your question. So let's go ahead and get started. Here we go. So my first question, Ermina, is that in the video, you told us of your interest in female demons from Kazakh and Turkic mythology. And here, I'm just going to share my screen and play a short clip from that video in which you talk about this.
I am interested in exploring female demons from Kazakh mythology, because I think, to me personally, those visuals of those demonic women kind of represent power, and I think they also represent power that many would find intimidating. Hence, it's looking so like evil and dangerous. For example, there is a female demon from Turkic mythology called Almaty, and she's described to have long tangled hair and saggy breasts that she throws all over her shoulders. This is my depiction of Almaty, and she can bring nightmares and diseases. According to the beliefs, she is especially dangerous to women in labor. So she steals the lungs of an expectant mother, but the victim won't die until Almaty throws the woman's lungs into a body of water. To me, it's such a striking and powerful image. Like, I am heavily inspired. I've always been heavily inspired by surreal art, and I think that's why I enjoy this mythological realm, because I can really explore those stories and create surreal visuals.
Okay. So from that, my question is, right before you talk about this interest in female demons, you discuss the disconnect between the actual experiences and strengths of nomadic Kazakh women and the contemporary kind of traditionalist ideals of Kazakh women as submissive and in need of protection. So I was hoping you could talk a bit more about how you see this interplay of women's supposed weakness and potential strength in shaping these demonic figures. Mm-hmm. For a figure like Almaty, right, who is attacking women when they are at their most vulnerable, when they're in labor, do you envision sort of a possibility for a more nuanced backstory, a kind of maybe a possibility even of redemption?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's not a super direct connection like to me. So for like, but the way what Albaste represents to me, in like a, I don't know, like looking at her from like a contemporary perspective, is basically how women in the modern, still in the modern society, are pressured into the role of a mother, and also like how if a woman makes a choice to be child free, how she's practically demonized by a society. So that's why I kind of see strengths in the female demons, and also like the way they're described as well, you know, like it's very like not delicate, it's like quite, you know, like quite an aggressive image, and a thing, especially in a society that is patriarchal and wants women to be soft and submissive. You know, any you know, like if a woman shows any aggression or sets boundaries, actually, if even if she doesn't actually be like explicitly aggressive, even if she just sets her boundaries, and or like she knows what she wants in life, you know, that's seen a bit like as, or she's just headstrong, that is perceived as aggression. And I'm not sure if I'm losing connection here, but yeah, in general, yeah, I think there's like kind of like, to me, it's kind of like, yeah, it's a relationship between, yeah, women being demonized for choosing not to have like a traditional motherly role, and this female demon who attacks women during childbirth, and like and a threat to a woman whilst she's given birth. So like kind of like a threat to motherhood, and like a more traditional image in my eyes. And I've read more about like other like female demons from the mythology, or like the generic realm of Turkic mythology and Kazakh mythology. But so far, that's the only one I kind of like took for inspiration, and actually produced an image of. And I think, to me, like, she's easily my favorite. I don't know, it's just like her description is so like striking, and this whole like thing, you know, like what she does, like, you know, like it just, yeah, thing. It's really interesting to me.
Okay, thank you. So on a kind of different note, in speaking of your project on the Kazakh famine, a project that's aimed at decolonizing the country's history, you mentioned the importance of avoiding the territory of national exceptionalism. And I just would love to hear a bit more about that and how you navigate around this territory in your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I've been like here, I don't know, like, because I was hearing, you know, like how there are like some people who can push an idea of like national like exceptionalism, and like really like aggressive, unhealthy nationalism in Kazakhstan nowadays. And I mean, I understand where it stems from. I mean, I'm not like condoning it by all means, but I understand like the roots of it. I mean, like we regained independence not that long ago, and I mean, the whole nation lived through like a, you know, a severe trauma of being robbed of a culture and a language. So I kind of understand, you know, this response in certain people. Like nowadays, it's still bad because, like, I mean, as violent and as sad as our like parts of our history are, you know, like we can celebrate the diversity that came from it, because, you know, like we are a diverse, multi-ethnic, multicultural society, and yes, the country became diverse off the back of a traumatic experience. But, you know, those like people who lived there for generations, I mean, you know, they can't leave. You know, they're part of our community, of our country, and it deeply saddens and troubles me. You know, when you have like Kazakh people kind of like saying, well, you know, it's our land. They're, you know, like descendants of invaders, you know, or whatever, you know, whatever way they put it. And, you know, it's really troublesome. And it's counterproductive because we can find a balance of celebrating Kazakh culture and making, for example, working towards making Kazakh language a dominant language, or, you know, like working towards having like a bilingual society, you know, without having like culture clashes between ethnic groups. And yeah, I think what's at fault here is a lack of education. So people kind of just see it from this angle because, yeah, they had like like a generational trauma, you know, they feel, I guess also part of it is, I'm guessing, like an inferiority complex, because there's a lot of internalized racism as well, like in certain people. So I think, yeah, it's a very, I don't know, like, I don't want to call it an inadequate response, but I guess, I don't know, an uneducated response. And the saddest thing is, like, obviously not everyone is like that. You know, we have like activists who work towards like the development of Kazakh language and like getting more people to speak it. But, you know, they would never say things like, you know, we don't want Russian people here, for example, you know, like, because I understand it's absurd, you know, they're part of a country. And yeah, it's I don't know, like it's quite a complex subject, I guess, because at the same time, I'm also like quite annoyed as well how like sometimes Russian media takes a spin of it, like, and, you know, says like, oh, look, you know, people of different of other ethnicities and Kazakh are oppressed in the country, which is also like not quite true. I mean, like, I'm not gonna lie, like, you know, like instances of discriminations towards non-Kazakh people can happen in certain places, you know, but overall it's not really the case. So it's such a delicate topic. Like there's so many like aspects to it, but, you know, generally I do get upset at like at Kazakh people you know, saying something nationalistic, or, you know, like, or even, you know, we have like people not being happy about ethnic Kazakhs coming back from China, or yeah, and there was a discussion about taking refugees from Afghanistan who are from Kazakh communities. And, you know, we had like segments of society who were like strongly opposed to it. And there's also like really weird logic to it, because like, for example, yeah, they will, you know, like the argument would be like, well, why did their families leave in the first place? They're traitors. And once again, you know, like I mean, like it's been so long ago, and you know, they want to come back to their like historical motherland, you know, like why not? I mean, we're a huge country with a you know, massive land, low population density, you know, that doesn't make sense to me personally. But yeah, and I hope it'll get under control and that will get tackled, because like I think it's a really slippery slope. Because I don't know if it's just my impression from like afar, it feels like it kind of grows, because, you know, like, and that in turn breeds, in my opinion, that breeds homophobia as well, because, you know, like people use an argument of like, you know, we can't have an LGBTQ plus community because, you know, it's not part of our culture, you know, like, oh, you know, Kazakh people aren't like this. And then, you know, like, or even, you know, like the rise of misogyny as well. It's once again like culture is used as a disguise, you know, like to excuse it, like, oh, but, you know, but it's our culture. And all of it, you know, like the wrong, I mean, like so much energy goes into this wrong direction of like safeguarding a culture. And yeah, it just like ends up being counterproductive. And I think we just like run in this like circle, and we can't like potentially, you know, like, I don't know, like we'll be stuck in it for God knows how long. And yeah.
So great to see already getting questions in the chat. I just had one final question that I think kind of builds off that. And then I happily, again, audience questions in the chat, or if you want to speak, you can just raise your little Zoom hand. But my final question, I think, really relates to that, because you are a Kazakh artist, but living and working outside of Kazakhstan. So how do you understand your role in critiquing, you know, the kind of sentiments you've been talking about, but also at the like latter half of the video, you talk about critiquing state violence against, for instance, protesters. Do you feel a particular responsibility to educate people outside of Kazakhstan about these issues? And then just a short follow-up, is there an active artivist community in Kazakhstan that we should know about and support?
Yeah, I think it is important for me to educate people like outside of Kazakhstan, like especially on like like on more, and like gives them like a more like nuanced view of what's happening, and like really explain and get them to care about what's happening, because like I mean it's a human rights issues, and and I don't know about responsibility. I mean, like, I do admit, I do find it, I don't know, like, I guess, yeah, I do judge when, like, I meet somebody from Kazakhstan and, they don't really, they detach themselves from that side, or they don't really care, or they choose not to care about it. And, like, I don't know why, maybe it's wrong, but it does jar me. Because, like, part of me is like, well, how can you not care? You still have family there, or, like, it's, your country, why don't you care? And I do think we also, like, being abroad and like working abroad, people are in a more like advantaged position to speak out the critique. I also think it's about unity, like it's important to have like diasporas from like, different countries as well, like speaking up, saying, like that's wrong, and raise awareness on like wherever they are. So it's unity and solidarity, and like I think it's really important, and I think it could drive change potentially, because like so like our authorities don't really like like being critiqued, especially if it gains attention abroad, and especially when, I guess, like when the West is watching, because like I mean we have to admit, like the world is quite Eurocentric, so like, and they kind of do want to look good for the West, I would assume, so like, yeah. And there is a really big artivist community. I mean, like a lot of it is driven by creative people, and a lot of people make projects about it or do like performance art for like, like whatever cause they're fighting for. Like, I don't know, like to give you a specific example, maybe like there's a lake system in the country's capital that is getting dried out, and it's an important like part of an ecosystem, because like migrating birds make stopovers at that particular place. So, but it's getting dried out because like they want to use the land for construction, like they're building like a housing complex there. They want to build a housing complex there, and then there was like a lot of artists fighting for it. They like set up like an activist group, and they were like basically volunteers, as I think from like all walks of life. But yeah, it was set up by like curators and artists, and they did like a lot of like really beautiful performance pieces to raise awareness about it. And yeah, a lot of like a lot of the art, a lot of people in the art communities do projects for like ecological causes, and yeah, and like I know as well, like there's quite a few artists who are part of like political movements as well. So, and in general, I think from at least like as well, once again looking from afar as well, I think like it's difficult being an artist in Kazakhstan. I mean, it's difficult being an artist anywhere, but I think it's especially difficult in Kazakhstan because there's not much like funding or support, especially for like, especially considering a big segment of the art community is openly critiquing the government. And, for a lot of artists in Kazakhstan, that's where the practice stems from. Like, there's also like a lot of people doing projects on decolonization topics and like directly critiquing the government. I mean, as I mentioned before, ecological issues. And yeah, I mean, I could happily share names and like people to look out for, because there's like plenty. I think we have such a amazing resource of like creative people, like considering how difficult it is and like how much, especially like for the artists who are like particularly more outspoken, and like how much, you know, like how much pressure they face from the authorities as well. And they still go on. I mean, they're like probably one of the strongest people.
Okay, thank you for that really informative answer. Yes. So we had a question in the chat, so I'll go ahead and ask that one and then turn it over to Sarah. So Ermina, this question is from Megan Fitzjames. And she asked, can you speak more about the Western depiction of Kazakh culture, either modern or nomadic? Do you see ethnocentric views in mainstream media regarding this?
Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting question, because like I think Kazakhstan and overall Central Asia globally is still quite like an invisible area, because like when you speak to majority of people in the world, and for example, you know, let's say even if I introduce myself as I'm from Kazakhstan, people can't really picture what is it exactly, you know, like what is the culture like, and it's really hard for them to place it. And yeah, and for Kazakhstan specifically, we're probably more well known for for Borat, which is like another like interesting subject for me to like, because yeah, and yeah, there's definitely, I mean, like Eurocentrism around it, because like, for example, I do think people would like bias you more, like, or you know, like there'll be more like harsher biases if you're like from Kazakhstan, or like I guess like from Central Asia, or like underrepresented places. And yeah, and yeah, other than Borat, I don't know if there are like any other like depictions of Kazakhstan that are more famous. And actually, yeah, because like I've been chatting with Megan before, like quite a bit, and I found out about her because from like after watching Eagle Huntress documentary. And Megan did a really good breakdown on how like the documentary isn't truthful, and you know, like it's true, it's not a truthful documentary. It's a prettily done, but completely misrepresents the culture. And I guess that's another one that's like another example in mass media that kind of was quite big and more well known in the mainstream, that talks about the Kazakh culture. And unfortunately, again, it misrepresents it because in the documentary, it's claimed that like women were forbidden to be in the forbidden to be eagle huntresses for like thousands of years, and that's just not true at all. And then that's yeah, I think that's quite a leechy behavior on the part of the director, because you know, I think he kind of used it to his advantage, that the culture is really, you know, unknown and, you know, like not widely known about, and he decided to build like a fake girl power narrative based on it. And yeah, and there's not much, I guess, like, yeah, action around it, because you know, then when we talk, and because I think when we talk about cultural appropriation, again, like more in the mainstream, I think still like when, for example, a culture like ours is like appropriated or misrepresented, you know, it wouldn't really go viral, you know, it won't like spark a big of a discussion. Will be more for like a localized discussion, or more like a discussion, you know, between people who I guess are more interested in it and are more knowledgeable around it, like from other parts of the world. Because yeah, as I mentioned, yeah, like unfortunately, majority of the world is still widely Eurocentric. So I guess I do feel less value is put on like cultures like mine, like globally. And I think that also drives my practice and my pride in exploring the culture, because I really want to like show, like, no, like it's all really interesting. You have a lot to say and a lot to share.
Okay, thank you. So Sarah, please.
Thank you so much for your really interesting talk. I had a question about what inspired you to tackle some of these topics about the Soviet past now. As an observer of Kazakhstan and someone who's been studying the country for a long time, I really have been astonished by what has happened in the last couple of years in Kazakhstan, the sort of huge upsurge of interest in the Soviet past, the upsurge of interest, particularly among a younger generation, about previously forbidden topics such as the famine. And so I'd be curious, I've haven't been able to get back to Kazakhstan since the pandemic started. And so, I have some guesses about what is driving this. Obviously, this upsurge of interest and this kind of more critical stance to certain elements of the Soviet past, it coincided with a change in leadership. Nazarbayev, the long-term leader of Kazakhstan, stepped down very unexpectedly, and then he handed the reins of power to Zhomar Tokayev, and that coincided with this wave of activism that you referenced in the film. But yeah, I'd just be really curious to see, to hear more about what inspired you and what you think is driving this upsurge of interest. And a sort of second and related question is, particularly in your treatment of the Soviet past, I'd also be curious, you describe it as a colonial past, and in my own experience, this is a very tendentious question in Kazakhstan as to whether the Soviet past can be described as colonial. So I'd be curious to hear, what reactions you've gotten from others in Kazakhstan to your framing of these issues from the Soviet past. Thank you.
Thank you. For me personally, I can't quite remember when I kind of started looking at it from this angle. I think for me, the crucial moment was like actually moving away from the country to study. So I first left when I was 15. And I think it was like a string of experiences that got me to it. So like first was I like basically became friends with like other students who were from Africa, like different countries in Africa. And and then like we would talk about like where we're from, and there'll be like a small cultural exchange. And then there was like a lot of students who like quite weirded out with me being Asian and speaking Russian, and they'll be like, but how come you speak Russian? And then to me it'd just be an obvious answer, like, well, I spoke it since like all my life, and I consider it my like mother tongue, and then I had my friends from Africa, and they'll be like, oh no, but you were a colony. and that kind of like got me. I think first reaction was like, like really, you were, because like the way we would talk about it at my school, for example, or like growing up in general, like it wouldn't be it wouldn't be discussed as like a colonial experience at all. It was more like, oh, it was a union. It was like, all those nations came together, like, and it will be described quite like a utopia. And and I think for me, like learning it outside of the country and like, like having like someone else who I guess like grew up with a better, like with a different experience, and I guess learning it about their own culture from a different angle. So I guess like they would look at me and my, like on how my country was shaped, and all this, like I don't think they knew too much about like the Soviet violence that happened, but they could still understand like, well, but you don't speak your own language, like, and it's got to be a colonial experience. So that taught me like I think like that was like the very like first kind of like interaction that shifted me towards it, because like later on I met like more people as well, like from countries that used to be colonies, and, you know, have this like intercultural discussion, and a lot of experiences similar, and a lot of feelings we felt, you know, quite similar, because I think people that come from like countries that were colonized, I think there's certain, you know, they experience like inferiority complexes, you know, like for example, like it's quite yeah, like would say from a personal experience, you know, like for example, you have like Kazakh people not liking their Asian features because, you know, they think having the more European features is more desirable, you know, more beautiful, for example, or, you know, they would think Kazakh language is not as prestigious to speak and things like that. And then another thing that led me to it, I think as well, my first clashes with experiencing racism as well, because, you know, like I think as a teenager, that would kind of, like I think like being a teenager and first experiencing it, that would, I think that made me feel a bit inadequate about myself first, and then, you know, that led me to like self-reflect, and then it got to the point when I felt like, no, I want to be proud of who I am, you know, I want to, you know, like look at my own culture and interact with it. And then I think like gradually I've realized, you know, how detached I am from it. And and then eventually, I think mostly from like having conversations with people with like somewhat similar experience, or like some of my friends who come from like immigrant families in England as well, who don't have identical experiences, but, you know, like maybe like had similar feelings towards their own cultures, and, you know, like learning about their cultural heritage, or like feelings of detachment. So I do think it's a very universal experience, and like a lot of my learning came from like other people around me from different cultures. And I can't really tell like why there's like such an interest towards it, and like in Kazakhstan, and like why so many young people are much more open to learn more about it. I really don't know the reason for it. But I also know like I've learned a lot from other artists as well who like exploring the subject. So like, or like a curator I mentioned in my talk as well, who like openly like explained, you know, like, oh, you know, and who like talks about decolonization a lot. And she said a really interesting thing as well, like, 'cause she tied a lot of ecological catastrophes in Kazakhstan, and tying it to like this like colonial mindset of the authorities, you know, like how, you know, like we, I guess, as a nation, you know, who went through an experience of like cultural erasure, and like don't feel too connected to the land itself, and, you know, like, and having like pretty much like a colonized mind, you know, like you don't value the land you're on, because, you know, like, you don't feel it's significant, you know, and then people like and I think like in particular artist community also ties the decolonization movement to the political situation as well, because like a lot of the oppressive techniques that still live on, it's all the legacy of like a Soviet oppressive machine. Because like I'm not like, I don't think actually, I don't know, I do agree what you like said, how like the transition of power happened, and like those more like people started protesting more and started paying more attention to it. I'm just like not sure if it's tied to like the wider decolonization concept, because like I think artists might have been talking about it like before, and I'm not sure if it still made it like big into the mainstream yet. I think like maybe at least like judging by like what I see on social media from like a distance, I think it's definitely the younger generation, but like I'm not sure what. Maybe because like with younger people, their generation that is growing up, that pretty much like only knew like the current government we have, even though the transition of power happened, they didn't like truly really happen, and I think they really understand it and they've been growing up with it. And yeah, and I haven't, I mean, like, I haven't had anyone react negatively to what I explore in my practice. Maybe, I don't know, like only like a couple odd occasions, but you know, like nothing like drastic. And you know, the ones that, you know, the more negative reactions that I've received were from people who are themselves going through a bit of like self-rejection, and you know, like, I don't know, like, I guess it's a bit of a sense of shame of who they are from this experience. So they have, I guess, yeah, they haven't like worked out their own feelings themselves.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that made me think, like, you know, artists having to be part of this global conversation just to be in the art world, if that has sort of like that puts them kind of in touch with other people from, you know, colonized places. And so it sort of, you know, made its way into that community before it's been able to make its way into a broader conversation. So we have two hands. I think Stephen, you were first, and then after that, we can pass it over to Susan.
Thank you. So I was really struck in your video by how you likened some of your work, especially the use of historical images, lost historical images, in fact, to finding gems of information. And then later in the video, you talked about the difficulties in wrestling with historical accuracy versus truth. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about these topics, and maybe tell us a little bit about a discovery you made of one of these gems of information that you hadn't realized was out there, where you found it, how you used it in your work, and then how you wrestled with this idea of truth versus accuracy.
Thank you. So we have like I mean, like, social media is like such a good resource for us, like, to like find information on the cultures. So we have like a lot of people who are researchers, or you know, who really love reading about history, but like especially like what I'm really happy to see is especially researchers being on social media and sharing their knowledge. So it's really accessible. It became really accessible in the last few years. And yeah, actually, yeah, maybe like, yes, slightly going back to Sarah's question. And yeah, I think maybe like it could be like social media contributing to it as well, and more popularity of the culture in the mainstream. And thanks to social media, its accessibility, because it's like small, like bite sizes of information. And yeah, so that's where I find a lot. So like I like follow like a few researchers who like are really enthusiastic and write about history, and yeah, and then yeah, I love looking at the clothing and then reading into like its symbolism, and yeah, what else? Oh, sorry, thoughts are escaping me. But I do remember when I first kind of like started reading into it, it was like less accessible, a bit harder to find. But yeah, I'm like happy to see there's like much more interest in the culture and much more like information shared. Yeah, I don't know what else to add.
Yes, Steve had asked if there were any particular gems, or if you remember, you know, a particular instance where you came across such a gem, and how you ended up using it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I love, yeah, finding like the particular little details about the ways of life. And I think, I mean, I can reiterate it here, was like in the video, I think the only one that I remember clearly is the one, the illustration I've talked about in the video, with like a woman who had like a key on her braid, and like how the nomads had like wooden chests with like the stuff in it, and the elderly women would like wear the keys on their braids. And that was so new and so striking, because like yeah, I never knew about anything like that at all. And yeah, it's really fascinating. And yeah, what else? There's another one. Yeah, actually, yeah, I remember another one that I've read about recently. So it talks a bit more about like further back in history, like medieval history, and how like basically people built carved like those stone idols, and how like a lot of them basically there would be a depiction of warriors, but like doesn't matter like male or female, they all had like breasts, like female breasts, because like in the culture at the time, like female breasts were a symbol of power, and like because like it's like nurture, like so you drink your mother's milk and then you become stronger and you live. So and that was quite interesting, and I think that part of history is like fascinating, and how like how, and like I also love about that particular time period how like a female body represented strengths, and there were like a lot of female warriors as well. But like I didn't know like about this particular visual symbolism, how like and there was a lot of depictions of like female warriors as well, because that was like common for the culture. And I think I think that's about it. And I also like of course get inspired by the other artists in the community who also like finding like like a lot of other information I might not like come across. And actually I think you asked about accuracy as well, the historical accuracy. And that's another, I think that's a big one of the bigger challenges, because they're like when we discuss history, you have like people like rejecting certain parts of history. I think like especially when it comes to the pagan religion and the pagan rituals, and like there's always this argument like between people of like are we pagan or are we Muslim? And then in reality like a lot of the traditions are kind of like come from the blend of the two. But you would still have like a lot of like pointless arguments, like, and people like I don't know, pointing fingers of like no, like for example saying like no, paganism is like savagery, we never had that, or like like we've always been Muslim, or like arguments over like the purpose of certain clothing elements, like for example like how like married women wore head coverings, and there'll be like this constant argument of like why did they cover their hair? Is it because they were Muslim and it's indecent to show hair, or is it for practicality because they were nomads, and like for a mother it's easier to have her hair like out of her way? And a lot of other things. I can't think of other examples, but usually I do get a bit paranoid when like I'm working on the next piece and I'm researching it, and like I start getting a bit worked up, like oh my god, like which one is the correct one, and like, and then I get worried like, oh, like what if I do something it's completely wrong? And then it then I eventually like come to the conclusion like, well, we disagree on so many things anyway. I'm doing art, I can take it as inspiration, and like I'm not an ethnographer or like or a researcher, I don't have to be super accurate. So like, and I let my intuition guide me, and and then I just work on an image that I think like feels right to me, and like I kind of let go of this obsession with being like historically accurate.
Hey, that's great. I think that it's really interesting to hear from those of us who are ethnographers or historians. Right? I guess you take a lot of inspiration from there, but ultimately you're doing art, and you have to let intuition guide at a certain point. So Susan, and then Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. Ermina, you're making me very nostalgic. I had the privilege of serving in Kazakhstan from 1993 to 96 at the US Embassy as senior commercial officer. And I had a wonderful, diverse staff. As I'm reflecting on your comments about the anxiety of moving forward, moving beyond the Soviet past, was it truly colonial? You've engendered so many interesting questions for further study and reflection. My own staff was diverse. I had one woman of Tatar background, 2 ethnic Kazakh women, 2 Russian guys. One of the Russians was named Mels. His parents must have been ardent party members. That was MELS, standing for Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, for those that haven't encountered that name before in Soviet studies or post-Soviet studies. They were a wonderful, fascinating group and talented people all. I'm wondering, to be brief and try to focus on one thing, kind of about the soul of Kazakhstan today during this fascinating transition time. And by that, I mean, what are the guiding lights of people? How are they deriving their values, their moral compasses? What are they using for inspiration? I know there have been missionaries in Kazakhstan in recent years since the collapse of the Soviet Union. One of my staffers, one of the ethnic Russian fellows, was exploring Buddhism just because he could, because the situation had opened up and that was available to him, where all that material had been banned or discredited previously during Soviet times. So, and I'm wondering in relation to that question, are there any leaders in Kazakhstan today, either in the government or in non-governmental organizations in civil society, that are promoting the idea of one society composed of these beautiful, diverse elements? The people of all these various backgrounds have a lot to bring to bear for the further development and evolution of the society, of the culture, and they can all be appreciated for what they can offer, rather than trying to decide who's up, who's down, whose background is more relevant, who's more worthy of respect and trust, and so forth. That's a big, broad question, and I've been removed from the scene for a while. I did go back and visit with my staff with great pleasure a few years ago, but I'm not up on very current events, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, that's fascinating as well. I think, like, unfortunately, currently the society is a bit like divided. Well, I say a bit, probably like a lot divided, and but yeah, I don't want it to sound like too like dire and like sad, but yeah, unfortunately there's division, and I think partially because it's like handy for the government to have like a divided society to distract it, like, you know, pointing fingers at each other. There's still like I mean, we still have communities that are united, you know, like that have a common goal, and I think like what unites like certain like parts of the society especially is like not wanting to have an authoritarian government, and this fight for human rights. And even with this subject, it's still this like still a division going on as well, like especially since like 2019 events, and when like a lot of protesting broke out, and more like political conversations became a bit more mainstream. So, you know, there was a divide in the society with people saying, you know, like, no, we want stability, even though like stability, with, like as it is now, you know, what they call stability is actually stagnation, you know, like it's not gonna go anywhere good. Like, and, you know, and then you have like another smaller segment of society who, you know, who want change, and like who want big changes, you know, like, and yeah, I don't know, as for the moral compass, it's hard to say with like a, you know, very like diverse but kind of a divided society. Yeah, really difficult to say, because from afar, like I'm mostly seeing like, unfortunately, like you know, like more like clashes, not like bit like physical fighting, but, you know, like more like people, like the two sides, like, or more sides not really listening to each other. Hopefully this will change. I think like the only way is education, and like I do see a lot of unity within like political movements, and like as I mentioned earlier, you know, like people see like fighting for human rights as a common goal. And I do hope it goes a bit more mainstream, and and I hope like this desire for like human rights and equality will make people unite, and, you know, like will breed a like a healthier ground for like the diversity. And yeah, and I don't know, like I hope like for the best. Obviously, it's hard to say when it will like stabilize a bit more, because I think we are like probably at our most turbulent like times of like kind of like trying to settle and work things out. And yeah, as I mean, like in a lot of aspects, yeah, there's like so much diversity and like at the same time division. I mean, like yeah, I don't know like what else could be sort of uniting force.
Could I ask one, Irina, if I might, one specific question about Islam? When I was there in the 90s, I mean, the government was limiting the number of mosques that could be built.
Mhm.
Is that still the case? Has that been an issue, or is that not a significant factor at all? Obviously, the fear of Muslim extremism was motivating that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, actually, because like I think there's a rise in religiousness on what looks like. And I think that's where the divisiveness also comes in, because, you know, we have like a lot of younger people either being agnostic or kind of a bit more like, I guess, like private with their religion, or like not really practicing them, or like, yeah, like still being more liberal, but like practicing, you know, like Muslims. And then there's like, there has been a thing like a spike in like people who like practice Islam, but follow the more like strict rules. So like, you know, like women cover their hair and like, and yeah, they practice it quite strictly. And yeah, as far as I know, like there's like no limitations or like no like stricter rules, so like to regulate it. I'm not too sure, because like I mean it looks like yeah, there's like more people like following the stricter form of like I don't know how to say it, because like I'm not religious, so I don't know what terminology to use here, but like yeah, like more like stricter practicing Muslims, I guess. Yeah, there's like a lot more of that. And from like, I haven't read too much into it, but like I was seeing how like there's like a lot of, I think, businessmen and like or maybe like government officials are like building mosques as well. And like people like I did hear like read like activists say as well, like it gets to like a bit of an absurd point of like, well, how many more mosques do we need in this one little region, you know, like they just keep like appearing, you know, like none of the people have anything against it. It's just like so much money goes into it. And but you know, like a lot of issues stay, and people also raise this argument of like you know, like religiousness growing, but is there like sense of morality growing, you know, there's like a like a little bit of like a dissonance in it as well.
Yes, ethics would be an important corollary to that question, certainly in business and government, an important issue all over the world.
So thank you. I think we're nearing the end of our time, but we have one time for, I think, one more question here from Stephen, who's patiently had his hand up for so long. So please go ahead.
Cool, thank you. So in the West, when we think about post-Soviet states, we typically just believe that, oh, they've been independent since 1991, and we don't consider the complex struggles that have gone on since then. So in that sense, what degree of independence does Kazakhstan truly have right now? For example, like what countries are influencing the Kazakhstan government or pressure Kazakhstan? And also, how does oil play a role in this? Because I know that, of course, that was something in your animation as well.
Oh, excellent question.
So,
and yeah.
Just gonna say, Stephen's referring to your Moncourt, that short film. I hope that, you know, a lot of people here, I'm sure, have already seen it, but if you haven't, we should put the link in the chat. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, like really good question. Like yeah, like what I mean when we talk, like I think when like people who are involved in activism or like in Kazakhstan, I mean they always raise this question of like, well, like how independent are we? Like there still like seems to be like a strong influence of Russia on us. And yeah, definitely like a resource curse as well is an issue as well. And yeah, like a lot of like political decisions are kind of like driven, like puppeteered by the Kremlin. So yeah, like it doesn't feel like we're too independent. I think like culturally as well, there's like still a strong influence of Russia as well. And yeah, and I also like feel as well like it's not like a thing like repeating myself here, but like it hasn't been like too long since regaining independence as well. So like I do understand like why we're not like breaking away from the cultural influence like so quickly as well. Like it's probably gonna, I don't know how long, but yeah, like I mean like the most upsetting thing is like how on a like politically, there's still like a lot of interference, and that then ties into like the cultural influence being strong, because then like we I guess like we don't have like our government placing its focus on like educating people on their own culture and like solving the issue of like the language issue as well. And like but the most upsetting part as well, it's how like Russia's interference with like the atomic power station, and like and how that is a big threat for us, and like for like pollution wise, or like god forbid like accidents and stuff, because like there's still like carelessness as well, like with like Kremlin's influence, like and like them lobbying for certain things, and like as I mentioned, like with a atomic power station, yeah, there's like carelessness towards our land and what's going to happen to it. So it's like this weird like outsourcing of like, oh, we're gonna trash this place. I mean, we don't care about it. And yeah, and like I don't know like how like how it will get resolved. Hopefully, yeah, like hopefully only for the best. But yeah, like right now, like it's strong influence from Russia.
Cool. Thank you for the insight. Very interesting.
So Ermina, there's messages in the chat from folks, including from Megan, and just now a longer one from Kay Ho, which for me is weirdly cut off, unfortunately, but I hope that you can take a look at them. I know that we have also our one of our guests here at ASU, Beba Chengerbayeva, who's a Fulbright from Kazakhstan. And I know that, again, we're now kind of a little bit over the end of our time, but I know that she wanted to add something to the discussion. So I'm hoping that we can do that, but yet keep it also a bit brief. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Ermina, thank you so much for your nice, interesting job. I think this is kind of this is a understanding of new generation of our maybe nomadic roots, nomadic culture. Unfortunately, I think Russian Federation or Russian Empire, it didn't work well on preservation of this nomadic culture. But I think for in case of artists, we see that it is something deep inside. So when we see the Russian colonialism, we see lots of reforms, administrative reforms that made us more controlled, much more controlled, and gradually we were losing on the way our language, for instance. And it was a really, I think during Soviet Union, especially also, it was a without knowledge of Russian, we were not able to build any career. So there was not expansion of Kazakh language schools, and religion also was prohibited, etc. So I think nowadays we have kind of a new model of generation of Kazakh who incline more to Russian language Russian language, but they still remain in touch with them, with their nomadic roots, with their nomadic culture. From psychological point of view, I think knowledge of Kazakh, it will be quite difficult for now. I mean, we cannot deeply understand Kazakh language since we lost our nomadic culture, because language, I think, is deeply rooted to our lifestyle. It was really deeply rooted to our lifestyle, and the situation was deteriorated with Russian Empire's policy, Soviet Union policy, etc. So this is my brief. So there was a colonization, and colonization was supremacy, I think, of more Russian Federation, Russian Empire than over other nations that the structure of this big institution.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So I think in our discussion, maybe understandably given the crowd, we had a bit more focus on kind of the geopolitical questions, and when we posed a lot of difficult and complex questions to you about that. But I think that again, from what I've seen, from hopefully what everyone here has seen, we appreciate kind of the incredible creativity and beauty and kind of groundedness in these different traditions in your artwork. And I appreciated hearing about that in the video. And I wish we'd also gotten a chance to talk about that a bit more here, because it was so interesting to hear, you know, especially when you talked about the way that you draw animals and the influences of that, as well as the way that you like those Turkish kind of carved faces. So it was just such a great pleasure for me to hear you talk about that, because I just have always found your work so incredibly kind of almost sui generis and so striking to me, but to actually hear like where the inspiration is coming from was really interesting. I don't know if you want to kind of say a few words to conclude, just more kind of focused on the art and what you're bringing to it and where you hope to see it go in the years to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I don't know. I think like right now I'm at the point of like where I focus on like the technical development of my skills, but I'm also like very comfortable with my visual style. I think that's where like I'm like putting a bit more energy on like the technical development. And yeah, and at the same time, because that's basically why I'm a bit like I'm doing like an ongoing kind of like a research, because like I'm comfortable with my visual language, so I'm like focusing on learning a bit more like of the history and like contextualizing it and sharpening my skills so I could better communicate and and have a better way of like communicating my ideas as well. That's where I'm at now, and like hoping to make an animated film soon. I mean, like I've been saying it since last year, but it's unfortunately it's a bit of a slow process, but yeah, I'm like happily researching and learning at the moment.
Well, I know that I speak for everyone here when I say that we all look forward to seeing what you come up with next. I think that Megan's point in the chat that your art is a window on the future and the past at the same time, and wonderfully unique, also rings quite true. So thank you so much, Ermina, for sharing your work with us and for answering our questions. Thank you so much to our audience for joining us for Creative Horizons. Again, on behalf of Golfo Alexopoulos and the University of South Florida, as well as Steve Norris, who had to go pick up a child at the University of Miami, Ohio. We want to thank everyone and hope that you'll continue to join us for these Creative Horizons events. We'll have an event coming up later this month, or did we say November? Somebody help me. Dave, what did we say? 27th. Great. So we'll definitely let you know about that, and we hope to see you on October 27th. We'll be hearing from Katerina Babinka, a Ukrainian writer. So thank you again to everyone and have a great rest of your day. Thank you once again to Ermina.
Thank you. Thanks for having me and asking all your questions. Yeah, it was really nice. Thanks.